Morning. We are going to be over in 2 Kings chapter 6. 2 Kings chapter 6, there is an account there of the king of Aram or the king of Syria, depending on your translation, warring against Israel, and what happens when Elisha gives away his position. In 2 Kings chapter 6, down in verse 8, it says, the king of Aram was warring against Israel, and he took counsel with his servants, saying, at such and such a place shall be my camp. The nature of the relationship between Syria and Israel was a combatant one. It was constantly at war, and it was war of a sort that was so ongoing that it took on different forms at different times. Sometimes it was outright war where the two armies would meet in battle at a battlefield, which typically Israel did not fare very well since Syria was a pretty strong country. But other times it looked more like what you're seeing in 2 Kings 6 verse 8, which is they were raids upon the land. The Syrians would say, well, look, we're just going to come in and we'll take what we want when we want it because we're bigger and tougher and stronger. And so it didn't look like an outright war as much as your territory's our territory whenever we feel like it's our territory. And so in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 8, that's exactly what's going on. He is at war in this continual state of war with Israel, and so he would send out, take counsel, and say, yeah, let's send a skirmishing raiding party over here this week. And then next week, let's send a raiding party over here, and then on the third week, we'll send them here. And you never know where war's going to break out. And that's the first thing that I want you to understand. The idea that we see in 2 Kings 6 is really not that different from the world that we currently live in. The world that we live in right now is constantly at war too. There have always been wars, and the wars look different. Right? That's one of the things that they will say is that war looks different now than it did 50 years ago. When we were fighting in Vietnam, one of the things that they dealt with was that war looked different in the jungles and that tropical humid environment. And then we go when we fight a war in Afghanistan, and guess what? It looks very different there. And then when we're fighting war against a nation, that's one thing. But then when you're fighting a war against terrorists who kind of pop out from nowhere, that looks entirely different. And you're seeing that on the news now, if you're watching that, the things going on in Israel with Hamas. War looks different every time, but war is still war. The world that we live in is constantly at war. In Psalm 140, verse 1 and 2, David says, deliver me, O Lord, from evil men. Preserve me from violent men who plan evil things in their heart and stir up wars continually. Stir up wars continually. One of the classes that I had to take in school is very similar, I imagine, to many of you. I had to take geography, and I remember having to learn the layout of all the different countries. And this country's here, and this country's there. And I don't know why I learned any of that. Because the countries that exist now look very different than the countries that existed when I was in high school. We just had the USSR. It was easy. But it's different now. And the reason for that is wars. Evil men fighting wars against each other, stirring up strife, and it's always been that way. What was it that God said? You go all the way back to the days of Noah. The men of that day, their thoughts were on violence and evil. We live in a world of war. And those wars are existing on the macro scale and the micro scale. There are big wars and there are little wars, but we live in a world that is in constant upheaval. And we also live in a world where deception and cunning are considered very valuable skills. Certainly that's true in war, right? If I can send a raiding party out and you don't know where that raiding party is going to be, then that's advantageous to me. But it's also true in every area of life that we have prized secrecy, we prize cunning, we prize deception. On Friday, went on a field trip with my kids to the Toyota manufacturing plant. And they tell you, you go into the visitor center and say, take as many pictures as you want. Right? We want you to take pictures with the Toyota symbol. We want your children growing up buying Toyota. We want you thinking Toyota as you go to sleep. We want all of those things. But now when you go into the factory, what do they do with your cell phones? They're going to take them away because of trade secrets, right? Trade secrets are of huge value. If you can make something in a way that somebody else can't make it and keep that secret, that is worth a lot of money. We prize secrecy. We prize it in sports too. People start getting in trouble for stealing call signals. We're dealing with, like, if you work for a professional football team and they trade you, you know what the first thing they want back? They want the playbook back. They want to take that stuff from you. Secrecy is a big deal in life. And we've prized it so that people who are very good at secrecy and cunning can make their living being, I don't know, magicians. Do you know that when you go see a magician, all you're doing is you're saying, wow, you're really good at being cunning. I want you to trick me and I'm going to pay you money to do that. I mean, this is the world that we live in. And then now let's start getting a little bit more personal with it. Why do they have filters for your camera on your phone? Why when you take pictures and you're going to post them on Instagram or something like that, why do they offer you filters? Because secrecy, cunning. If I can look better than time has made me look, if I can make something look better than what it actually is, we prize that. We pay for that. We get excited about things that allow us to prop our lives up to look more like what we want them to than what they actually are. And this is the problem that we live in. In Psalm 119, verse 118, it says, God spurns all who go astray from your statutes, for their cunning is in vain. We prize cunning. But do you know who the very first being who was ever talked about as being cunning was? The serpent, isn't it? You go all the way back to Genesis, and it's the serpent that was cunning. So we live in a world that's at war. We live in a world where man fights against man, and we do that with guns, but we also do it in our economies. We also do that in our neighborhoods. We do that in our relationships. I'm friends with you, but I want to look better than you on Instagram. And we do it with cunning and deceit. Now, I say all that because the thing that happens next in 2 Kings 6 is the thing that really turns the world upside down. In 2 Kings chapter 6, here is this king of Syria, and he's going out, and he's sending out these raiding parties. But in verse 9, it says, the man of God, that's Elisha, sent word to the king of Israel, saying, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are coming down there. And the king of Israel sent to the place about which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned him, so that he guarded himself there more than once or twice. Now the heart of the king of Aram was enraged over this thing. And he called his servants, and he said to them, will you tell me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, no, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet who is in Israel tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. The first reaction when all of a sudden these raiding parties don't work out, the first reaction of the king of Syria is, okay, I'm trying to be cunning, so which one of my people is a spy for Israel? In other words, his thought is, somebody's trying to be more cunning than me. You realize that? That's what's going on. He says, I'm being deceptive. which one of you is a spy and is being deceptive for the king of Israel? But that's not the answer to it. It's the exact opposite of deception that's going on. What Elisha is doing is Elisha is a prophet from God, and he's telling the king of Israel, look, God knows what's going on, so don't go to this place. He's disclosing things. In Matthew chapter 6, there is a hard truth that we do not discuss often enough. And it shows up in verse 4, in verse 6, and in verse 18. And it is simply one simple phrase. Your Father who sees in secret. Your Father who sees in secret. Remember the reaction of the king? He is enraged over this. He's not, oh, this bothers me a little bit. He's enraged over it. You know why? Because kings value their privacy. You and I, we live like kings. If you're surfing the internet, every single internet browser has the exact same buttons for privacy browser. Why do you think it is that every single internet browser on the market today, you can go up and somewhere find private browser? Why does that exist? It exists for only one reason. You like your privacy. And all the other 7 billion people on the planet like it too. You want to be able to do things or look at things that other people wouldn't know about. And oftentimes we know, especially with the internet, when somebody moves to privacy browser, so oftentimes the things that they're looking at are things that they ought not to. But we value privacy. We value our privacy as human beings. We value the right to do what we want and say what we want and think what we want, and nobody knows unless we want them to know. But what does Matthew say? What does Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? Your Father who sees in. God knows everything. And there is nothing that is hidden from His eyes. Which brings me to the next point, which is men hate that God knows everything. Mankind hates that God knows everything. And I'm not saying, oh, mankind out there, no, you hate it sometimes too. There are times in your life where you will pretend that God doesn't know what's going on. We play this silly game where we act like God isn't watching. And you know that you do it because you can think back on moments in your life, maybe even moments this last week, where if you had been thinking about the fact that God can see everything you do, you would have made different choices. If you had thought about Jesus standing right next to you in the moment, you would have said different things. You would have thought different things. You would have acted in different ways. We as human beings struggle with this idea that God knows everything. In Psalm 73, verse 9 through 11, it says there in that psalm, they set their mouths against the heavens and their tongue struts through the earth. Therefore His people turn back to them and find no fault in them, and they say, how can God know? Is there knowledge in the Most High? That phrase, that evil men, that their tongue struts through the earth. A chicken strut. Have you ever seen a rooster? He struts until he's in the frying pan. You had never seen a more proud creature on this planet than a rooster. He wakes up and all the rest of the world's supposed to wake up. He'll strut with his tongue. But we all know where roosters end up. They don't even give you eggs. This is the problem with mankind, is that we strut through life. And we say, well, does God really know? Yes. Yes. Let me answer that question for you unequivocally, that God knows. He is the knower of deeds that are done in secret. As Acts chapter 1 describes, He is the heart knower. He's the knower of the thoughts and intentions of the heart. Hebrews chapter 4 verse 13 says, no creature is hidden from His sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of Him to whom we must give account. And I think that language absolutely describes why it is that we struggle so much with this idea, and how much we will rationalize that it's not really true, or find ways to conveniently forget that God knows everything, is because God, nothing's hidden from His sight, and it says everything is naked and exposed. And that idea of being naked and exposed before God is not appealing to anybody. But it is what it is. There's nothing you can do that He doesn't know. There's nothing you can think that He doesn't hear. The thoughts and the intentions of your heart. He gave you a word that is living and active and able to divide between soul and spirit. Do you think He can't figure out what you did last Thursday afternoon? We do not like that idea of, and the opposite of privacy is accountability. That's the opposite. If it's private, nobody knows and I'm not accountable. If it's public, it's accountability. That's why we have certain things that are public records, so that anybody can make a request for those public records in America. We make them that way to hold the people in power accountable. Of all the creatures on the planet Earth, you are the most powerful. God made the birds that fly in the sky. He made the worms that wriggle in the ground. He made the whales in the ocean. He made the beasts of the field. And then He said, let me make man in my image, and he'll have dominion over all of them. You are the most powerful creature. But there is accountability. Men hate that accountability. But may I give you an alternative way of looking at it? The alternative way of looking at it is what we find just a couple verses down in 2 Kings chapter 6. In 2 Kings chapter 6, the king is enraged. He finds out it's Elisha. And then in verse 13 he says, go and see where he is, that I may send and take him. I always think this is an interesting plan. He's supposed to figure out where Elisha is. Never mind the fact that Elisha always knows where he is, and you kind of break your brain. Figure out where this guy is so I can sneak up on him. Still working with the cunning system, aren't we? And it was told him, saying, behold, he's in Dothan. And he sent horses and chariots and a great army there. This isn't a raiding party anymore. We sent raiding parties to this place and that place, but when it comes to get Elisha, we send a great army there. And they came by night, cunning, and surrounded the city, cunning. And when the attendant of the man of God had risen early and gone out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was circling the city, and his servant said to him, so the servant now says to Elisha, alas, my master, what shall we do? So here's all this cunning. Here's all this deception, this thing that we hold so dear, this privacy. I can do things in secret. I can surround the city by night. I can sneak up on this guy Elisha. This is the way of the world. I'm going to be the trickiest guy out there. And then Elisha's servant walks out, and he sees that the city is surrounded, and he's caught up in the trickery of it. Right? He's caught up, I've been outwitted. What are we going to do? Here is a circumstance that we were not prepared for. And here's where I want you to begin to pivot in your mind. Because this quarter we're talking about hope, right? And if you didn't have the next part of this, you wouldn't have hope. You'd just have God knows everything. Beware. But the next part of this is, look, it's unexpected for you. Right? Things are going to happen in your life that are unexpected. Proverbs 24 down in verse 16 It says the righteous falls 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumble in times of, and the big word here is calamity. There's a word you don't use every day, calamity. The wicked stumbles in times of calamity. The righteous person falls, but he rises up again. But times of calamity are coming. Or in Ecclesiastes 9 verse 12, for man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. Look, you are going to have unexpected things happen in life. It's just going to come with the territory of living as a human being. There are going to be times where things happen to you that your cunning cannot prepare you for, or somebody will out-deceive you, or the world will throw something at you that was unexpected. And if you are wicked, it's a time of calamity and you will fall. But Proverbs 24 says that the righteous man falls 7 times, but he gets back up again. Because if you're alone in the time of calamity, it's a bad day. And that, at this moment, is exactly how that servant feels. He's surrounded, and on every side there are bad things. And he thinks, it's me and Elisha. How are we going to take on this army that surrounded the city? How are we going to handle that? He woke up that morning and, he probably did the same thing he did every morning. He got up in the morning and he plans on drawing some water and maybe getting the fire started. Just a normal day in Dothan. It wasn't a normal day. And that's the thing that we all have to remember, is that there are going to be days that aren't normal days. There are going to be days of calamity in your life. So I want you to prepare to be unprepared. I want you to prepare to be unprepared. If you ever watch any of these expeditions where they send people off and they go off into the Arctic, or they go into some Amazonian jungle, and they go on some journey and expedition to go to different places, and they pack all the things that they think they could possibly ever need, right? All the different foodstuffs and ways to filter water and ways to stay warm, all the various types of medicine that you could imagine needing, different forms of shelter, backups for the backups, right? You don't just take enough food to last you barely to it. You bring some extra stuff. They pack rafts and you name it. And then the last thing that they're going to make sure that they have every single time in today's modern world is they're going to have a satellite phone. Because after you've packed everything else, and you've prepared as much as you could possibly prepare for this expedition into some unknown territory, the one last thing you need to make sure you have is a way to call home. If something shows up that you were not prepared for. That's what I mean by be prepared to be unprepared. Be prepared to be unprepared means I recognize that there are going to be things that happen in my life that I cannot properly and adequately prepare for without calling home. But thanks be to God that I can. Thanks be to God that I can call home. That I can trust in Him in the day of calamity. Because in Ecclesiastes 9, you notice, the first verse I talk about is verse 12, 9 verse 12, where it talks about the evil man who's snared in this time of calamity. But if you go back up one verse, Ecclesiastes 9 verse 11, he says, again, I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. Here's the thing. You can be as smart or as strong or as wise or as powerful, and time and chance happen to them all. If you have not God, you are not strong enough for this life. It is a guarantee. You need Him. Which brings us to 2 Kings 6, verse 16. The servant says, what shall we do? Well, what am I going to do? And the answer to that, by the way, is nothing. How are you going to beat that army? You're not going to beat that army. But then in verse 16, what does it say? So he answered, do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. One of the things that I want you to understand about this entire set of events here is that fear comes up over and over and over again. There are people, there is Israel that is afraid of the king of Syria. There is the king of Syria who is now afraid of Elisha. There is the servant who's afraid of the army. And there is Elijah who says, do not be afraid. For those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Fear is reverence in disguise. If somebody can get you to fear them, then all of a sudden they have power over you. And I'll tell you, Satan really wants to have power over you. If he can get you to function from a state of fear, you will make the kinds of decisions that he absolutely wants you to make. If Satan can get you to view life through the perspective of fear of this world, fear of loss, fear of what might go wrong, if he can get you to function through that worldview, he absolutely can get you to do what he wants. But that's not what God tells us. In Exodus 20, verse 20, Moses says to people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. Notice what he says, do not fear, but God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be upon you. Or Matthew 10, verse 28, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. There is a healthy fear and there is an unhealthy fear. There is a fear that will allow the events of this life and the people of this world to control you. But then there is a fear of God that will blow all of those out of the water. Because the thing that will happen next in 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 16, is down in verse 17, Elisha prayed and he said, O Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, strike this people with blindness, I pray. So he struck them with blindness according to the word of Elijah. And then Elisha said to them, this is not the way, nor is this a city. Follow me, and I'll bring you to the man whom you seek. And he brought them to Samaria. Interesting, he gives them a little bit of cunning too, right? I know who you're looking for. He's over here. They wanted the king of Israel, and he's going to bring him to him. But what Elisha says is, he prays, God, open his eyes that he may see. He doesn't say, Lord, please bring the army. The army's already there. He doesn't pray, God, figure out a way to protect your servant. God had already figured out a way. He prayed, may we see it. Open our eyes that we may see. When you live with an attitude and disposition that God is, then you realize the world's not the whole picture. The world's not the whole picture. Have you ever seen magicians? Like Penn and Teller are some magicians that are known for doing this. There are others who have done the same thing, where they will show you a trick, take you through the whole trick, and then at the end of it, they'll expose the trick. They'll show you how it was done. Remember there was one, Penn and Teller did this, where they ran over a guy, whichever one doesn't talk. I can't remember which one that was. They ran over him with a semi-truck. Just laid him in the ground, right there on the asphalt, and just ran over him with a semi-truck, and he stayed quiet the whole time, which was impressive because I would probably squawk if I got ran over by a semi-truck. And you see the whole thing, and they show it to you from all these different angles, and it's very impressive magic. And so the special was 90% that. And then at the last second, they say, here, come over here. And they take the camera and they bring it around to the other side. And they show you that on the other side of the semi, there are weights. So that the semi is actually weighted and it's tipped this way. And the tires that you thought were running over the guy, they're actually foam. Really impressive tire-looking foam, but just foam. And the thing about it, the thing that struck me, and it strikes me this way every time I learn how a magic trick is done, is, oh, that's it? Which is why magicians, they call it the exposure law. Magicians have some very strict rules that you are not allowed to expose tricks, not just because they're tricks given out to the general public, but because everybody feels the way I do. Oh, that was it? I'm convinced that if you could see the heavenly realm, if you could see the angels that God sends to minister on your behalf, if you could see the work of God that is constantly being done on behalf of His people, you would go, oh, why was I worried? Why was that something I was concerned about? That's all Satan can throw at me? The trick's in the cunning. The trick is in the deceit of it. When he can get you to think that everything in your life is the stuff here on earth, then yes, he can get you to sell out your birthright. He can get you to pursue evil with short-term gains that will have long-term consequences because you're not thinking of the big picture. And so what I'm telling you to do is, I want you to remember to turn the angle of the camera. The next time you're going through something big, the next time you're finding yourself worrying about things of this world, or being loaded down by weights that feel far too heavy to bear, and you're saying, what shall we do? I want you to pray, Lord, open my eyes that I may see. I want you to remember this world is not the whole picture. And that in the history of the world, there was a time when this earth wasn't. And there will be a time again when it isn't again. And in that day, we'll go to meet our Maker. If you look in Colossians chapter 3, and we'll finish with this. Colossians 3, 1 through 3, it says, if then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you've died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. The end result of a Christian life is one that says, my life isn't here, but I'll set my mind above where my Master lives, where He sits at the right hand of God. I will tell you, if you are not yet a Christian, and I like to say it that way, by the way. I like to say, not yet a Christian, because you have time. You can absolutely become a Christian. You can absolutely have Colossians 3 apply to you as much as it applies to every person who is already somebody who belongs to Christ, and their Master sits at the right hand of God. So if you are not yet a Christian, I want to ask you, why not? I want you to think about it and realize that this world's not the whole picture. I want you to be ready for the next. If you would like to obey the gospel, the good news of Jesus, and become a Christian, do not wait any longer. As we stand and sing the invitation song, we invite you to be baptized.